Kenya, often hailed as one of East Africa's most stable democracies, finds itself at a dangerous crossroads in 2025. On July 7th, a date weighted with historical meaning, tens of thousands of protesters once again flooded city streets, calling for President William Ruto to step down. They marched on Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and smaller towns, united by outrage over police brutality, surging living costs, and broken promises of reform. Yet these protests are not merely another round of political unrest. They represent a generational reckoning, a deep crisis of legitimacy for the government, and a test of Kenya's commitment to democratic freedoms, hard-won over decades. The catalyst for this latest explosion of anger was the death in custody of Albert Ojwang, a young activist and blogger. His killing has become a symbol of state impunity, galvanizing a broad movement that cuts across class and region, but is notably led by Kenya's politically savvy, digitally connected Gen Z youth. Scenes of tear gas clouds, burning barricades, and frantic evacuations from stormed hospitals have filled news broadcasts and social media feeds alike. William Ruto's path to power was built on a compelling promise that he was the voice of the hustler nation, the millions in Kenya's informal economy shut out by entrenched elites. His 2022 campaign portrayed him as the son of a roadside chicken seller who would champion the poor against the dynastic families of his rival Raila Odinga and former President Uhuru Kenyatta. For many Kenyans weary of elite corruption, Ruto's message resonated. He narrowly won the presidency, pledging to uplift ordinary people, lower the cost of living, and make government work for the marginalized. But in office, Ruto's administration quickly embraced austerity measures that cut deep. Fuel subsidies were eliminated, sending transport and commodity prices soaring. A controversial finance bill proposed new taxes on a struggling population. While Ruto argued these steps were necessary to manage Kenya's debt and satisfy lenders like the IMF, many saw them as a betrayal of the hustler ethos. Critics began calling him Zakayo, after the biblical tax collector Zacchaeus, an epithet that stuck, summing up the sense of disappointment among voters who had hoped for relief, not new burdens. Public anger did not remain theoretical. In 2023, Ruto's government faced a series of street protests over soaring costs of living and plans to reconstitute Kenya's Electoral Commission. Demonstrations met with harsh police crackdowns, tear gas, arrests, and deaths. Tensions simmered into 2024 when the finance bill triggered an even larger, more violent crisis. On June 25, 2024, protesters stormed Kenya's parliament building, smashing windows, seizing ceremonial maces, and confronting security forces. Police opened fire, killing at least 19 people and injuring hundreds more. Images of blood-soaked streets and tear gas swirling through Nairobi's business district shocked the nation and the world. Under immense pressure, Ruto withdrew the bill, but the damage was done. His popularity plummeted, and the label of authoritarianism began to stick. Far from calming, the government's aggressive policing approach has continued to provoke outrage. Kenya's security forces have a grim reputation for brutality, and Albert Ojwang's death in 2025 became a rallying cry precisely because it fit a broader pattern. When protesters gathered on July 7th, Saba Day, the anniversary of Kenya's 1990 pro-democracy marches, they did so with an acute sense of historical symbolism. Saba is not just a date on the calendar, it represents the moment Kenyans forced then President Daniel Arap Moi to concede to multi-party politics after years of one-party dictatorship, police repression, and detention without trial. By returning to the streets on Saba, today's protesters are explicitly claiming that tradition of resistance and democratic renewal. To understand the stakes, it helps to recall how deep Kenya's democratic struggle runs. After independence from Britain in 1963, the country fell under the strongman rule of Jomo Kenyatta and later Daniel Arap Moi, who amended the constitution to make Kenya a de facto one-party state. For years, opposition politicians were harassed, exiled, or detained. The 1982 coup attempt against Moi was crushed, followed by even harsher repression. But economic crisis, pressure from civil society, churches, and foreign donors, and unrelenting street protests, including the original Saba demonstration, finally forced Moi to legalize opposition parties in 1991. Even so, the 1992 and 1997 elections were marred by ethnic violence and vote rigging, and Moi remained in power until 2002. Kenya's transition after Moi offered hope, but the country continued to struggle with electoral legitimacy. The disputed 2007 election led to over 100 deaths in inter-ethnic violence and displacement of hundreds of thousands. A power-sharing deal brokered by Kofi Annan ended the crisis but left scars. Ruto himself was indicted by the International Criminal Court for alleged crimes against humanity related to organizing violence, though the charges were dropped in 2016 after key witnesses recanted amid claims of intimidation. This episode cemented Ruto's reputation as a skilled but ruthless political operator willing to use any means to win. Even more recently, elections in 2013 and 2017 were bitterly contested, with Raila Odinga repeatedly challenging the results and even boycotting reruns. Against that backdrop, Ruto's 2022 win was remarkably narrow and controversial, though upheld by Kenya's Supreme Court. It was supposed to turn the page on the old rivalries, but instead Kenya's political class fell back on familiar patterns of winner-takes-all governance and hostility to dissent. Critics argue Ruto has centralized power, undercut oversight, and sought to control key institutions like the Electoral Commission, echoing past leaders' autocratic tendencies. Today's protests, therefore, are about much more than fuel prices or a single finance bill. They are a rejection of that old political playbook. What makes the 2025 unrest especially notable is the prominence of Gen Z organizers and participants. This generation is less tied to traditional ethnic-based politics and more focused on issues: corruption, police violence, cost of living, and accountability. Their mobilization is also digitally sophisticated, using encrypted messaging, hashtags, and live streaming to coordinate leaderless demonstrations that the government struggles to contain. While the state frames the protests as a threat to security and order, many see them as a necessary act of democratic self-assertion in a country where voting alone has often failed to deliver real change. In the end, these protests are not only about William Ruto or even about this moment. They are about the soul of Kenyan democracy, who it serves, how it can be held accountable, and whether it can deliver on its promises to all citizens, not just the connected or the wealthy. As Kenya's Gen Z leads the way in demanding answers, the world is watching to see whether this crisis will mark another cycle of repression and protest, or the birth of a new, more inclusive chapter in the nation's long struggle for freedom and dignity.